Okay, so this section is all about the Charleses, the Jameses, and the English Civil War. You need to know 5 very specific monarchs in order, and 2 others after them. So, Jimmy, Charlie, Ollie, Charlie, Jimmy. James I, Charles I, Oliver Cromwell, Charles II, James II. If you've read and taken notes, you have this in your notes. Jimmy, Charlie, Ollie, Charlie, Jimmy. Jimmy, Charlie, Ollie, Charlie, Jimmy. Say it with me. Jimmy, Charlie, Ollie, Charlie, Jimmy. Again. Jimmy, Charlie, Ollie, Charlie, Jimmy. The numbers go in order. So the first Jimmy has to be James the first. And the first Charlie has to be Charles the first. Oliver Cromwell is not a monarch. He is Lord Protector. The monarchy was abolished. We restore the monarchy. We have Jimmy, Charlie, Ollie, Charles II, and then James II. Followed by Bill and Mary, so William and Mary, and then Anne. So Jimmy, Charlie, Ollie, Charlie, Jimmy, Bill and Mary, Anne. And if you run it together, it's Jimmy, Charlie, Ollie, Charlie, Jimmy, Bill and Mary, Anne.
Mary Ann is that one?
Bill and Mary, Anne. But you run it together so that it makes sense and sticks in your head. Jimmy, Charlie, Ollie, Charlie, Jimmy, Bill and Mary, Ann. You can do it. I know you can. All right. We need to do a little review before we move forward. So we're going to flash back to the Tudors. Remember them? A little? Maybe?
I do.
Hopefully you do. Okay. The Tudor family tree started with Henry VIII's father, Henry VII. The little star means King of England. So, Henry VII is married to Anne of York. They have 4 children. Their first is Arthur. Then Margaret. She was a real disappointment. Why? She's a girl. Henry, who will become Henry VIII, and then Mary. Now, being the heir to the throne means that your marriage is very strategically significant. So Arthur, as the son of a Catholic monarch, is married to a Catholic princess, Catherine of Aragon, in 1501, at the age of 15. Now, when you marry a monarch, you must be a virgin. The queen must be a virgin. Why? We have to be certain about the line of inheritance. We have to know that that's the king's baby that's conceived. So they have what's called a bedding ceremony. King's 15, Catherine's like 14. Okay? The whole court crowds into the royal bedchamber and tucks them in all nice on their wedding night. And then a guard is left at the door. Nobody enters or leaves until a specially appointed member of the court comes in the morning to collect the bed sheets. Why? What do they want on those bed sheets? Blood. Proof of virginity and the subsequent loss thereof. That way we know the queen was pure and that any heir to the throne is going to be the king's. Okay? Next morning, no blood. And that goes on for months. Finally, they send them off to the country where hopefully they can get over their teenage naivety and consummate the marriage. Because in the Roman Catholic Church, a marriage that is not consummated is not a marriage. While they're off in the countryside, Arthur dies at the age of 16. They've been married a little under a year. Still, no bloody bedsheet. So the assumption is that the marriage was never consummated. Catherine is supposed to get sent back home. England and Henry VII, the king, keep making up excuses to kind of keep her around. Because who's now the heir to the throne with Arthur dead? Henry is now the heir to the throne. And he's going to need a wife too. And how convenient would it be if by the time he's old enough to get married, we've got a Spanish princess just kind of sitting around twiddling her thumbs? Gee, and she's clearly a virgin. So in 1509, after Henry dies, Henry VIII marries Catherine of Aragon. Anybody find that creepy?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like not okay to marry your brother's widow. Like, literally, it's not okay to marry your brother's widow. There's a rule against that in the Catholic Church. So Henry has to get special permission from the Pope, what's called a papal dispensation. Special papal permission to break the rules. And he gets this on the grounds that Arthur and Catherine were never actually married because, exactly, it was never consummated. So the Pope says, all right, I still think it's creepy, but okay, here you go. And so he lets Henry VIII marry Catherine of Aragon. And they have a daughter, Mary. Now, that is most unfortunate for Catherine, right? Because she doesn't produce an heir to the throne for Henry, and that's what he wants more than anything else. So he concocts in his mind that this marriage is cursed because he married his brother's widow. So he goes to the Pope, who's a new Pope by now, and he says, I need a divorce. And the new Pope says, seems to me as though you got a papal dispensation to be able to marry this woman. And Henry says, yeah, I know, but it must have been a mistake because the marriage is cursed, I can't have a son. And the Pope says, yeah, there's this thing called papal infallibility. We Pope dudes, we don't make mistakes, so for me to grant you a divorce on the grounds that the dispensation shouldn't have been granted, yeah, that can't happen, so no divorce. You remember this? And so what does Henry do? He separates from the Catholic Church, makes himself the head of his own church, and immediately grants himself a divorce on the grounds that it was totally creepy for him to marry his brother's widow. And so then, by that time, we know he is already shacked up with Anne Boleyn. We know this because they are married, and the daughter Elizabeth is born about 6 months later. Anne clearly had a bun in the oven during the marriage ceremony. But that's okay, Henry's the head of the church, he can make that all right. Now, Anne is in a spot of bother herself, because Elizabeth is very clearly not a boy. And that's a problem. So Anne is pregnant again, and she goes to see Henry ride in a joust. And Henry is dehorsed. He gets knocked off in the joust. And he lies there on the ground for quite some time. And Anne loses it. She goes cuckoo. She can't handle it. She's desperately in love with him. She also understands that in usurping Catherine, who had a lot of loyal followers at court, Anne is the outsider, and that she won't be long for this world if Henry dies. They say that the anxiety over him being dehorsed caused her miscarriage. The same dehorsing opened an ulcer on Henry's leg. An ulcer is basically a wound that just does not heal. For the rest of his life, it's kind of constantly festering. It's certainly painful and sore for him. Eventually, it's going to make him smell pretty gross. It causes him a lot of pain. He's going to begin comfort eating. This is when he will balloon up in size to that great, huge Henry VIII that we're familiar with in pictures. His final suit of armor, when they measure it, today would be a waist size of 52. You could not hug this man and have your hands meet by any thought. They also believe, historians think, that there is some likelihood that Henry bumped his head when he was dehorsed and may have suffered a cerebral hemorrhage of some sort. From ever after, he's more volatile. And we used to just write this off to he's a redhead, but we know that such stereotypes don't actually have basis in science or reality. But from this joust on, he's more volatile, he's more moody. He will go into absolute crazy rages for no clear reason. And so we think maybe a little Dane Bramage for Henry as a result of the joust. So Anne has a miscarriage, and it was a boy. And Henry goes into a rage and blames her. And she's like, but I begged you not to joust. And then, and she gets pregnant again and miscarries again. And it's so early in the pregnancy that they don't know. By this time, Henry's fed up. He sees the sands slipping through his hourglass. He needs a male heir. And so Anne must go. She is believed to have been unfaithful, and so she loses her head. Henry marries again. Jane Seymour, who Henry is very much in love with. Henry married Catherine out of convenience and obligation. He married Anne because he was in lust with her. And he marries Jane out of love. He was in love with Jane. And he is even more in love with Jane when she delivers him Edward, his son. Unfortunately, Henry does seem a bit cursed. Jane dies of childbirth complications within a matter of days. There is to be no spare to the heir from Jane. Henry will marry 3 more times. No children are produced. They do not affect the line of succession, and so I don't have them up here on this family tree for you. When Henry dies, who takes the throne? Edward. Go. Edward takes the throne. Edward rules about 6 years, dies young. He was always unhealthy, no heir, and so then Mary, back to Catholicism. Mary dies despite her marriage to Philip II of Spain, a strong Catholic monarch. No heirs. And so when she dies, good Queen Elizabeth, will become the monarch. She is known as the Virgin Queen because she never marries. We won't get into a discussion of whether or not she was actually the Virgin Queen. So when she dies, that, folks, is the end of the Tudor line. No more Tudor monarchs. But we have to have a next ruler of England, right? So we have to figure out where to go. So we have to climb back up the family tree and out on a different branch to find the next suitable monarch. And we do that by looking at, and let's go back to this. Oh, curse the animations. By looking at these siblings, Mary and Margaret, okay? No. The animations are really cool the first time, not so much the 8th. Okay, so now we have a Scottish family tree. This is how we make the connection between the Tudors and the Stuarts of England. You don't have to memorize this one, but when I have skipped this step in the past, it left students incredibly confused as to how we got from A to C. Okay, so this is step B. This is the Stuart family tree, spelled E-W-A, as opposed to the Stuart U-A. Okay? So, Margaret, Henry's sister, got her? She marries James IV, King of Scotland. So the stars on this tree are Scottish kings, 2 separate kingdoms. Are you with me? Okay, so Maggie marries James IV of Scotland. They have a son who becomes James V of Scotland, who marries a French princess, Mary of Guise. They have a daughter, Mary, who becomes the Queen of Scotland. We refer to her, when we do so, as Mary, Queen of Scots. Always, unless you are only discussing Scotland. Okay? She is always Mary, Queen of Scots. Why? Because Mary the First, known as Bloody Mary, right, is the big Mary, the Queen, in English history. And they are relative contemporaries in time. Okay? So, Mary, Queen of Scots, make sure I do this right. Okay. Becomes queen at 6 days old. Yeah. So, can you guess what we have? A regent. Very good. Now, what religion are the Scots? They are Catholic, yes. They are Catholic. For now. Okay. Now, Mary, Queen of Scots, becomes queen at 6 days old. When she is born, or shortly thereafter, her regent takes care of her betrothal. Betrothal is the plan to marry her off, her engagement, if you will. She is betrothed to Henry VIII's firstborn son. This is a good marriage. England, Scotland, neighbors, Catholic country, right? Yay. Except that in order to get a firstborn son, what did Henry have to do? Leave the Catholic Church and become a Protestant. So by the time Henry has a firstborn son, he's no longer a good Catholic monarch, and the Scottish nobles say, yeah, about that betrothal, not so much. So they break it off. Mary will not marry Henry's firstborn son. So they got to find another marriage. So they married her off to Francis II of France. Because she is not yet old enough to rule Scotland in her own right, they ship her off to France to be there with her husband, to be the good wife. He dies 2 years later. No kids. Well, Mary's not staying in Scotland, so she gets shipped back home. In the meantime, in those 2 years, the Protestant Reformation has reached Scotland in the form of a fellow by the name of John Knox. You may remember him from Geneva. He brings Calvinism to Scotland, where it will morph itself into a new Protestant sect, Presbyterianism. So, here comes Catholic Mary back to now Protestant Scotland. But she is the queen, and she stays the queen of Scotland. So Catholic monarch, Protestant country. Uneasy, but it goes on. Now, she marries a Scottish noble by the name of Lord Darnley. She does so in 1565. 2 years later, he's found murdered. And she is pretty widely believed by contemporaries and historians to have been behind that murder. But before he died, they had a baby, James, who will become James VI of Scotland. Now, here's where history gets really cool and really creepy at the same time. People who say history is boring just haven't studied it enough, because this is kind of awesome. All right, so Mary had married Lord Darnley, produces an heir to the throne. Lord Darnley. Then we're pretty sure she had him killed. Within months of his death, she marries the Earl of Bothwell. We don't bother putting him up here because there's no kids. But the thing about the Earl of Bothwell is that he is pretty widely believed to be the guy who actually killed Lord Darnley. It's like an episode of Maury Povich or a Lifetime movie, right? Yeah. They had it going on back in the 1500s, right? Okay. So James is Catholic because his mommy was Catholic. But he's ruling a Protestant country. And so, to kind of smooth things over, he marries Anne of Denmark. What do we know about Denmark? It's been hit by the Protestant Reformation, and Anne is Protestant for now. Okay. So that was the Stuart family line in Scotland. Now one thing, when Mary married Francis II of France and went over there, she changed the spelling of Stuart. She changed it to the French spelling of Stuart, which you have here, the UA, Stuart, which will be the spelling that her heirs keep. Okay? All right. So James VI of Scotland. Did you follow the family tree from Margaret Tudor on down? Okay? It's his great aunt. Actually, his great grandmother, sorry. Is Margaret Tudor Henry's sister. So he is the grandnephew of Henry VIII. Ascends to the throne. He is James VI of Scotland, and at the same time, simultaneously, same dude, he is also James I of England. If it were physically possible, he would wear both crowns at the same time. He remains King of Scotland and is King of England. He has to convert to Anglicanism to take the English throne, and he does so. He never again returns to Scotland in his lifetime. Now, James and Anne will have 8 children, but only 3 of them will survive. Their first is Henry Frederick. He and his dad didn't get along at all. They kind of bullied him. And it was probably a fortunate thing for Henry and potentially for England that Henry predeceased his father. So he will never be king. They have a daughter, Elizabeth Stuart, whom they marry off to Frederick V, the King of Bohemia. Bohemia today on the map is part of the Czech Republic. Okay? Germanic. What you've got here, the reason this line is dotted is because I skipped a generation. There's another daughter and her spouse, and then George. The reason George is up here, he is not a Stuart, but I am providing for you the link to the next royal family, because we're going to create and end the Stuarts in this section. Okay? About a generation and a half. So George I will be the Hanoverian kings, the House of Hanover. George III, have you heard of him? He's the reason John Hancock signed the Declaration of Independence so big, because he was very nearsighted, or very farsighted. George III is the British monarch who lost that war of the rebellion with the colonies. This is his grandfather. Okay? Following? All right. So the third child of James I and Anne of Denmark must be the heir to the throne, and it is Charles I. Charles I will be the next Stuart monarch. He marries Henrietta Maria of France. What can you guess about Henrietta Maria? She's actually not Protestant because she's royal. She is Catholic. Awkward. Truly awkward. Okay? What? Henrietta Maria. The fact that she is France. The fact that she is Catholic is going to create a lot of problems for Charles. A lot of problems for Charles. They have 3 children who survive. They have Mary Stuart. Another one, yes. They have Mary Stuart, who is married off to William of Orange. Orange is a territory within Denmark. Okay? So Mary is raised Protestant and she marries a Protestant noble from Denmark. They have a son, William. It's going to get real creepy in a second. Charles has a son he names Charles, who will be heir to the throne, but only after we abolish the monarchy and then bring it back. And then there is another son, James, who will take the throne after his brother. James marries Anne Hyde. No particular significance to Anne Hyde, except that they have two daughters. Mary, who marries her cousin, her first cousin. Yep. There are no children. Who's thankful for that? I am. And Anne, who is the end of the Stuart line. And there you have the entire Stuart monarchy succession. James I, Charles I, Charles II, James II, William and Mary, and Anne. And then down here in the corner, George is the link to the next royal family to rule England. All of this is going to be on the blog, so you can go back and catch any of it that you've missed, or you could screenshot the video and print it out for yourself if you want. Moving on. So James is the King of England. He's converted from Catholicism to Anglicanism to take the throne. He takes the throne in 1603 when when Elizabeth died. He will rule until 1625. Pretty good long rule. Now, he'd been King of Scotland for a long time because, let's see, his mother became Queen of Scotland at 6 days old. He became king at 13 months old. Because remember, it didn't take long for his mother to kill his father and marry his father's murderer and then be forced out of Scotland. So the whole way that he became king was because Mary, after marrying her husband's murderer, was forced to abdicate. The Scottish nobles were like, all right, that's enough weird creepiness, you got to go. And so she runs away to England. This Catholic monarch of a nation which has kind of intermittently been at war with England runs away to England thinking that her cousin Elizabeth is going to protect her. Now think about this. If Mary's son is in line to eventually become the King of England, isn't Mary in line to rule England? And she runs to the woman who is holding on to the throne with her fingernails for protection. Elizabeth lets her stay in England and eventually has to put her to death because Mary is just wrapped up in too many Catholic plots to kill Elizabeth and take the throne and convert England back to Catholicism. Elizabeth really hated to do that. You just don't kill a crowned head. It's just not something you do when you are one. But ultimately, Mary is put to death at the hands of her cousin for plotting to kill her cousin. And I think we can draw the conclusion that Mary would have had no problem doing that. Right? Mary, Queen of Scots? Yeah. All right. So it was when she was forced to leave Scotland that James becomes king. So he's been king for a long time, but he hasn't actually been ruling. Right? Okay. So he becomes King of England in 1603. The next year, the Puritans announce their desire to reform the Church of England. What is a Puritan? A Puritan is a member of the Church of England, an Anglican, who wants to, and this is a real stretch for you, purify, the Puritans want to purify the Anglican Church. They believe that the Anglican Church just has way too much Catholic flavor still left in it. They're like, no, the Anglican Church needs to go on an anti-Catholic diet. Less incense, get the idols out of the church. Enough with this Virgin Mary stuff. Let's remove the altars. Communion shouldn't be so ritualized. We just don't. Wash it all out. Less Catholic, more Protestant. James, having been a Catholic, recently converted to Protestantism and the Anglican Church, goes meh, and pretty much disregards the Puritan requests. He's almost completely unsympathetic. Now remember, he's a Scotsman. The English do not like the Scots by and large. When he comes to the throne of England, who does he bring with him? A whole bunch of Scotsmen, and he makes them his advisors, and he advances many of them as members of the English nobility. And because he was Catholic, he brings with him Catholic Scotsmen. Ew. I mean, he's a king, and he's our king, and we love him and all, but ew. Not okay. So, there are a number of plots planned to assassinate James. But the big one is known as the gunpowder plot. This guy look familiar to anybody? You ever seen V for Vendetta? Remember the 5th of November? The 5th of November is the day that the gunpowder plot was discovered and broken up. Okay? Here's how it works. Guy Fawkes is the one that's always associated with the gunpowder plot, but he was not the primary conspirator. He's the guy who gets caught in the basement with the gunpowder. The plot is this. The king ceremonially opens the Houses of Parliament. It's called the State Opening of Parliament. He goes there physically, he sits on the throne, he delivers a speech, he actually just reads the speech. Parliament is open and he goes back home, but he takes his whole family and all of the lords are there in the House of Lords. He actually sits in the House of Lords to open it. The members of the House of Commons are invited in. Well, the plan is, gee, we hate the Scottish nobility that he brought with him, and we hate him because he seems to be, he's just Scottish, and the Catholics, well, the Protestants don't like him because he was Catholic, the Catholics don't like him because he's kind of harsh to Catholics to prove to the Protestants that he's not pro-Catholic. Follow it? Right? Okay, it's kind of like the same situation that Henry of Navarre was in France. Okay? So, this is a Catholic plot to kill King James and his entire family by blowing up Parliament during the state opening. Now, historians have taken the quantity of gunpowder that was there, and they reconstructed the House of Lords as it was built at the time. And Parliament, when this goes down, does not look like what you see now in the pictures of Ben and Westminster Abbey. Okay? It's a bunch of separate buildings. They're interlinked a little bit. There are shops. People live there. It's kind of all a jumble. But underneath the House of Lords is this big open basement. Okay? It was the storage for a number of shops. So one of the shop owners leases out the basement and starts storing firewood down there and a little bit of coal. And underneath the piles of firewood, a tremendous number of barrels of gunpowder. He's one of the primary conspirators. One of the conspirators has a friend in the House of Lords. He writes that friend a letter and says, maybe you shouldn't be there for the opening. Because I like you, and, stuff happens, and so you shouldn't be there. Well, that friend is like, that's weird, and takes it to Lord Salisbury, one of James's advisors, and says, do you get this? Because I don't get it. Salisbury's like, because Salisbury knows about all of the other earlier plots that have been put down. So the king is out of town, he's hunting. When he comes back, Salisbury shows the letter to the king, and the king's like, yeah, this is definitely not good. How about if we search the buildings? Let's just do that. So on the 3rd of November, the king's advisors and all sorts of soldiers go and search the buildings. Don't find anything. Report back to the king. King's like, let's send a few guys to look again. So on the 4th of November, they discover in the basement of the House of Lords Guy Fawkes standing there. And he kind of plays dumb, and he's like, I just work for the storekeeper, and I'm just down here counting the firewood and stuff, and, you know, firewood for the store, you know? And they're like, oh, okay, let's go. So the king's like, yeah, I still don't buy it. Go look again. So on the 5th of November, they go back, and here's this same dude standing there. He's a little jitterier. He's like, no, man, it's just firewood. It's just some firewood and stuff, you know, because we gotta have firewood for the store. And so one of the soldiers finally, I mean, we're talking lots of gunpowder in barrels. So this is a massive pile. Finally walks over to the pile and goes, yeah, so this is an awful lot of firewood. Oh my God, it's a barrel beneath the firewood. And so then the other soldiers start moving. Oh heavens. So they arrest Guy Fawkes. And they cancel the opening of Parliament. Okay. They go to the Tower of London with Guy Fawkes, and they start interrogating him, and he won't give anything up. I just firewood. I didn't even know about the gunpowder. I didn't put it there. I was just counting the firewood for the store, you know, because firewood and stuff. Firewood. And so the king has to personally authorize any torture. Torture's been banned, except under special circumstances authorized by the king. The king says, torturing. Start mild and work up. And so the first thing they do is they hang him on the wall. Well, that becomes really uncomfortable about the time your shoulders start dislocating from the weight of your own body, and the circulation's cut off to your hands, because blood doesn't pump uphill through constricted joints very well. You ever fall asleep with a hand up like this, and then you wake up and it's totally dead? Yeah. Imagine hanging on the wall with your own weight cutting up. Yeah. So he still doesn't talk. He's like, I don't know nothing about nothing, man. Nothing. So they put him on the rack. Oh, God. Now the rack is an exceptionally painful torture device. And he sings, he sings, he sings. He gives up everybody and everything. And so they get all the other conspirators. They're all going to be killed. But there was a lot of anti-Catholic sentiment in the country. Anti-Catholic. Because everybody in the country, because the Church of England is the official church, is supposed to go to Anglican services. And the king, again to emphasize how Protestant he is, has instituted a fine for recusancy. Recusancy is the crime of not attending Anglican services. R-E-C-U-S-A-N-C-Y. Recusancy is the crime of not going to Anglican services. You're fined for this. Every week you don't go. The fines for the wealthiest nobility who didn't go could be £25 a week. That would be about $3 million a year in today's dollars. This is a harsh fine. Okay? The reason it's so harsh is because if you're not going to Anglican services, it's not because you just don't, you know, I'm just not into it, the whole religion thing. Why are you not going to Anglican services? Because if you're a Catholic and you go to Anglican services and take Anglican communion, you're going to hell. So you can't go to Anglican services if you're Catholic. So it's like you're paying for kind of nudge, nudge, wink, wink permission to be a Catholic. Okay? Well, after this Catholic plot to assassinate the king, the restrictions on Catholics are going to get even harsher. But to show you how strongly the English and the courts felt about the plot to kill their king and his entire family, here is the sentence that was placed upon Guy Fawkes. Quote, it's very specific. Will be drawn backwards to his death by a horse, his head near the ground. So what they do is they put some boards together, and they strap him onto the boards. And they attach those boards to a harness behind a horse. And so he's on the ground with his feet up in the air, propped up, and is drugged this way along the ground, clear to the execution site. Okay? That's not real pleasant, because guess what happens? Well, you're not that close behind the horse that you're going to get pooped on, but that's a good guess, Paige. But the horse throws up dust and dirt and stuff. People are throwing things at you. You're scraping stuff up as you're getting drugged. It's very unpleasant, and it's very humiliating. And how many of you have spent half an hour with your head significantly lower than your feet?
And then your head starts hurt.
It's pretty painful. Pretty painful. Yeah. Give it a shot tonight if you have the time. See how you fare. I don't recommend trying the rest of the sentence, though. Okay? He's to be put to death halfway between heaven and earth as unworthy of both. What method of death is that? Halfway between heaven and earth?
Buried alive.
No, that would be in the earth.
Sorry.
Being hung. You're going to be hung halfway between heaven and earth, right? Now, the thing is, back then, hanging wasn't meant to be a humane punishment like we have used it in the U.S., where we drop you from a certain height so that when you hit the rope, your neck snaps and death is instantaneous. Back then, they were quite okay with you just dropping a foot or two and asphyxiating based on the rope against your throat and the weight slowly strangling you to death. Okay? But they had something better planned. They cut him down before he dies. Okay? So he's been drugged. Then we're going to partially strangle him. Now let's cut him down. His genitals would be cut off and burnt before his eyes.
Oh.
Now you might think he's dead now. Except this is castration. We do it to farm animals all of the time, and if you do it well, the loss of blood is relatively minimal. Extraordinarily painful, on top of everything else he's been through, and he watches them be burned before his eyes. This is the ultimate shaming, right? This is public. He's naked the whole time. Okay. Oh, we're not done.
That's the worst part.
And his bowels and heart then removed. So once his genitals are ash, now we're going to gut him and pull out his bowels. Probably going to die then. And then pull out the heart. Then he will be decapitated and quartered. How do we quarter somebody? We tie each wrist and each ankle to a rope and strap it to a horse. And then drive those horses in 4 opposite directions. So that the body is literally ripped apart. Okay? The dismembered parts of his body displayed so that they might become prey for the fowls of the air. So we're just going to leave them out for the birds to peck them apart. So are you real clear on how the British felt about Fox and the plot to kill the king?
Yeah.
That kind of doesn't leave any doubt in your mind, does it? Yeah. So guys who died in prison before the sentence could be carried out were exhumed and still went through the quartering and birds. Yeah. So nobody escaped. Okay. So 1605, this goes down. Now there is a wave of sympathy for James. He's going to get to really rule England. And what he starts out to do is improve the economy. And he does so by sponsoring a group of 120 settlers who set sail for the Americas in 1606. They actually land and establish the first permanent English colony in the New World in 1607. Jamestown is the first permanent English colony in the New World, 1607. And that was as big as it was. You guys have all had American history. You know how hard they had it the first several years. But it's called Jamestown because King James. A number of students I have who are like, I don't know, why would it be Jamestown? It's pretty disappointing sometimes. Thank you for being with it. All right. James also gives us another significant historical contribution. He sponsors the publication of the first English translation of the Bible. It is known as the King James Bible. published in 1611. No, he did not translate it himself. There are some of his contemporaries who make reference to the fact that James could barely speak English himself because the Scots brogue was so strong that it was difficult to understand him sometimes. Okay. Now, James has been trying to get some arrangements made. He's got a son. He needs to make sure that his son has a wife put together, and he's trying to arrange a marriage with the Infanta of Spain. Parliament is like, yeah, but they're Catholic. And James is like, that's foreign policy. That's my job, not yours. Shut up. And he dismisses Parliament in 1611. Because James believes he is a divine right, absolute monarch. God chose me, I answer only to God, man's rules, man's laws mean nothing to me, I am the boss. The problem for James is that the English system had long since established that the money, the power of the purse, as it's called, is controlled by Parliament. So James needs money to run his country. So in 1614 he has to reconvene Parliament. That won't go so well. In 1620, because he has not been kind to them, a bunch of Puritans go over to the Netherlands, they get together, they hire a boat, and they set sail for the New World, but they do so with a charter from King James. While he is not a fan of them, he has no problem giving them a bunch of land somewhere where they're going to be far away from him just to get him out of their hair. That will probably be Swift, what your folks do with you when you drop out of college, move in, you're living in the basement, they're like, here, here's $500, just go. They will treat you like the Puritans. Just get out of our hair, we don't care. So, the Mayflower lands in the New World, and they found the Plymouth colony to be built entirely on Puritan principles. James dies in 1625. All right, so let's recap James as monarch. He tended to be a bit Scottish, which was slightly put off-ish to his English subjects. They're alienated by him. James has a lot of male favorites at court. Wink. A lot of male favorites. He spends a lot of time with a few close male companions who also tend to be Scottish. That makes English eyebrows rise very high. Am I saying James was gay? Not conclusively, but yes. Okay. James is good at political compromise for the most part, which makes his reign seem pretty stable. 20 years of relative peace in England. The problem was he gave up a lot to Parliament to keep the peace. And his son is going to pay for that. He is a divine right absolutist monarch. Here are some things that he said. He said, smoking is hateful to the nose, harmful to the brain, and dangerous to the lungs. And he said this before the founding of Jamestown. Once the tobacco starts rolling in from the New World, he kind of forgets that he said that because it's making him rich. Okay? Then he says, kings are justly called gods, for they exercise a manner or resemblance of divine power upon earth. Now, is that not typical of a divine right monarch? Yeah, he's basically saying I'm the next best thing to a god. Here's how he felt about his English subjects, though. One of his advisors comes to him and says, you know, you've been out hunting, you've been closed up here in the palace, the subjects need to see your face. And he says, God's womb Charles, which is a way of saying, holy mother of expletives, okay? I will pull down my breeches and they shall see my arse. How much contempt is that for your subjects? Just step out, give them a wave, go for a ride in a carriage through the streets so they can see that you're here and alive. And he says, no, I'm going to show them my butt. That's how much I care what they think. Okay. He does put down the gunpowder plot, which strengthens him as a monarch. And he founds Jamestown, which strengthens the English economy for the future because it furthers that mercantilist policy. All right, so his heir is Charles the First. Look at all that power, the orb and the scepter and the crown. That picture is like the calling card of I'm the boss. Right? This is Donald Trump. Okay. Now, James did not set a wonderful example for his son with all of those male favorites. Because one of James's male favorites becomes his son's favorite male as well. George Villiers, the Duke of Buckingham, is not the Duke of Buckingham when he starts. In fact, he is the first person with non-royal blood to be elevated to such a high position at court. He assumes a lot of power that was not rightfully his and acts on behalf of the king a bit too much, and he's going to pay a price for it, as will Charles. He had attempted to arrange the marriage between Charles and the Infanta Maria, and got so uppity about how much power he had, he and Charles actually sailed to Spain to woo the Infanta. And Buckingham, not the Prince of England, Buckingham felt like he was snubbed by the Spanish court and came home and said, the heck with those Spaniards. Let's marry him to a French princess, Henrietta Maria. And you know what? They were so rude. Let's go to war with Spain. James, by that time, is very elderly. He could have stopped the war, but he died.